Listen, Tranquility Base here.
When man first walked upon the moon, it defined a generation.
The Eagle has landed.
As this new millennium dawns, we face a greater challenge. Climate change threatens our very existence. What further disasters will convince world leaders that the existing technology in renewable energy offers the last remaining hope for a sustainable future? Hollow words and spineless resolution have failed. Now is the time for an energy revolution.
Isn't that the most awesome sight? Millennia of ice growth dramatically breaking loose and crashing into the sea. It's awesome, but it's also frightening. Because global warming is melting glaciers in every region of the world, putting millions of people at risk from floods, droughts, and a lack of drinking water. In the United States, most glaciologists expect that by 2030, Montana's Glacier National Park will have no glaciers left at all. Glaciers are the Earth's largest freshwater reservoir, collectively covering an area the size of South America. Glaciers have been retreating worldwide since the end of the Little Ice Age, around 1850. But in recent decades, they've been melting at rates that cannot be explained by historical trends. The culprit is global warming, and sadly, we are to blame because of all the greenhouse gases we've released into the atmosphere over the past 150 years of industrialization. It's the imbalance of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that's got much of the world worried about global warming.
We're living in a time of inequilibrium. We're out of balance with nature's emission and absorption, so the stock and flow of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. But this isn't the only time it's happened. The ice ages, in fact, are also times where we've seen a change in the equilibrium system and then a readjustment. What's different about this moment is that things are happening on a very rapid timetable. So we have seen the amounts of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere being as high as they are now or considerably higher. But in those past episodes, it took decades to centuries to millennia to happen. And now we're seeing this compressed on a timetable that's incredibly fast. So over the past 10 to 15 years, we've seen a real convergence of the science of global warming and understanding of what our options are to do something about it. In terms of the science, there's been report after report from national commissions to individual researchers to the umbrella group that I'm a member of, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, that have all come up with a very consistent story. Unless we can change the amount of greenhouse gases that we emit as a global society, that we are on par to more than double and maybe even triple the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
Burning natural gas, coal and oil, including gasoline for automobile engines, raises the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Some farming practices and land use changes increase the levels of methane and nitrous oxide. As more farming occurs to feed millions of new people, more greenhouse gases enter the atmosphere. Many factories produce long-lasting industrial gases that do not occur naturally, yet contribute significantly to the enhanced greenhouse effect and global warming that is underway.
We are changing the system by our industrial lifestyle, our industrial metabolism, if we will. We're not adapted to what might be out there in the greenhouse. So this is a real high-stakes game, and it's one where all of the options that we're seeing in the science are ones that are likely to cost us in terms of the economy, the environment, many of the things we depend on for our daily life. So it is a high-stakes gamble with the planet.
Deforestation also contributes to global warming. Trees use carbon dioxide and give off oxygen in its place, which helps create the optimal balance of gases in the atmosphere. As more forests are logged or cut down to make way for farming and other uses, there are fewer trees to perform this critical function. Adding to the effect of deforestation, some parts of the world have a known and predictable fire season. For example, Each summer in Southern California, residents look nervously toward the horizon each time they catch a whiff of smoke. As the planet warms and precipitation decreases in some areas, scientists warn that the risk of wildfires is increasing. Moreover, the wildfires themselves contribute to climate change, releasing CO2 and particulates. Biomass burning accounts for the annual production of some 30% of atmospheric CO2, according to NASA's Dr. Joel Levine. The situation is particularly dire in boreal forests, where dry needles act as instant sparks and peat catches fire and smolders for long periods of time, resulting in major CO2 emissions. On the plus side, Reuters reported that as a wave of wildfires swept Russia in the summer of 2010, President Medvedev reversed his previous position that human-induced climate change is not happening by proclaiming, "What's happening with the planet's climate right now needs to be a wake-up call to all of us to take a more energetic approach to countering the global changes to the climate." In its January 2011 edition, Scientific American magazine reported that the frequency of natural disasters has increased by 42% since the 1980s, and the percentage of those that are climate-related has risen 50 to 82%. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center estimate that in 2008, climate-related calamities drove 20 million people from their homes, more than 4 times the number displaced by violent conflict. Population growth is another factor in global warming, because as more people use fossil fuels for heat, transportation, and manufacturing, the level of greenhouse gases will continue to increase. Ultimately, more greenhouse gases means more infrared radiation trapped and held, which gradually increases the temperature of the Earth's surface and the air in the lower atmosphere, changing the Earth's climate.
The way that carbon dioxide, or the greenhouse gas balance in the atmosphere, works is that we emit it, and of course nature emits some as well. And before humans, the natural emission rate and absorption rate by the oceans, by plants, was about in balance. Humans have started to perturb that at the level of a couple percent a year. Every molecule of carbon dioxide or methane, two of the strongest greenhouse gases, that we emit does eventually get absorbed back into the system, but it takes a while. Every molecule of carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for about 100 years. So yes, if we wait long enough, we will get that CO2 absorbed back into the system. But most of us don't wait 100 years for the system to get back into equilibrium. So we are diverging from that natural balance, and we are right now in a time of extreme inequilibrium. We're far out of balance.
Even small changes in climate can have major effects. It can take the Earth thousands of years to warm up or cool down just 1 degree when it happens naturally. An increase of 1 or more Celsius degrees in a period of 200 years would be considered global warming. Over the course of a single century, an increase of even 4/10 of a degree would be considered significant. From 1901 to 2000, the average global temperature increased by about 6/10 of a degree Celsius, slightly more than 1 degree Fahrenheit. When the time frame is advanced by 5 years to 2005, scientists found that the temperature increase was 0.74 degrees. That's global warming.
So if our time scale to wait and see the system balance out again is 200 or 400 years, what we've emitted now, yes, will be absorbed back into the natural system. But it's going to take so long that our economy will be significantly changed in the meantime. So it's a short-term effect on the geologic scale, but it's a very long-term impact on the human scale.
The damage we've done to the environment is permanent. It cannot be reversed. We need to make many difficult yet critical decisions now. We cannot wait, or it will be too late. Mankind's future on Earth depends on the decisions we make and the directions we set for ourselves now, not later. Our world is changing, and not for the better. Our reliance on fossil fuels, our blatant disregard for and the waste of nature's diminishing resources, our voracious appetite for more in a world that is increasingly shrinking in its ability to provide the bare necessities for a population that is rapidly growing beyond what Earth can sustain, global warming that is literally changing the face of the Earth. Melting glaciers, creating vast deserts and redefining the agricultural regions of our world. Our world may not yet be the world depicted in the sci-fi worst-case scenarios, but is becoming more and more inhospitable to mankind's existence in it, and we have only ourselves to blame. We need to seriously ask ourselves how long we human beings can exist on planet Earth without taking bold and necessary steps to ensure our sustainable future. Because of our disregard for the health of the world's ecosystem, our planet Earth is rapidly becoming uninhabitable. The only way that we can protect and ensure our future on Earth is by protecting the future of our world and its environment. In The Dragons of Eden, Carl Sagan compressed the history of the universe into one calendar year. Dinosaurs appeared around the 26th of December, and the entirety of all of mankind's history is the last second of that year. Looking back into Earth's history, paleontologists and other scientists have determined that 99% of all species that once existed on Earth are extinct today. Their brains weren't large enough to protect themselves from the future. Now, a large percentage of Earth's fauna is being threatened by outside forces that have nothing to do with the size of their brains. Writing in Nature in 2006, 19 of the world's leading biodiversity scientists warned that climate change alone would lead to the extinction of between 15 and 37% of all species by 2100. It makes you wonder what the time frame is for us humans. Homo sapiens, modern man, is the only species with the brain power to shape and create our environment, to ensure our future on Earth. The question is, will we? Charles Darwin wrote, "It's not the strongest species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change." The challenges of the future and mankind's reaction to them all may well determine our future on Earth. Looking ahead, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development envisions a world population of more than 9 billion people in 2050, who consume 2.3 times planet Earth's ecological resources. If we continue business as usual for the next 40 years, a millisecond in the history of our world. We cannot wave a magic wand and create 2 new Earths with the ecological resources to sustain 9 billion people in the near future. The fact is, we're using up our planet's resources at an alarming rate, and to even have a chance of reaching a sustainable global society by 2050, in which the Earth's 9 billion people live well and within the limits of the planet, will require a radical transformation of how we think about and utilize those resources. With only 1/3 of the projected world population of 2050, our world today is experiencing natural disasters that are only foreshadowing what is to come.
But there's a whole series of nasty surprises that are lurking out there in the greenhouse that we don't know exactly at what year or what temperature increase or what amount of CO2 they'll happen, but they are likely to happen. And the more we adjust the system warmer, the more likely they become. And they include things like a dramatic change in the amount of ocean circulation that affects fish populations, and it affects all manner of coastal sea life. Also affects the amount of moisture we get in coastal areas.
The only real solution, many scientists believe, is to tackle global warming at its roots by reducing emissions from fossil fuels, or by stepping up efforts to take carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere.
While we know the climate change story We also know that attributing climate change to short-term actions is difficult because the climate system is complicated. But that said, we also have at our disposal a pretty wide range of technologies available to us that can help us to decarbonize or make cleaner the energy system. We've seen an incredible takeoff in the solar industry worldwide. We've seen wind power growing by 25% or more per year now for a decade, the same as solar. In fact, last year, more money was spent and more new capacity was installed in wind and solar than anything else. So that's amazing for technology that only a few years ago seemed like an interesting kind of side note to the main story. Doesn't mean we've reversed the system and we suddenly have a clean energy supply, but it means that in terms of rates of change, that some of the renewables are growing remarkably fast. And what's most exciting about solar and wind and some of the cleaner biofuels and ocean power and using our energy systems much more efficiently is that they all work very well together.
The sun is our most powerful and constant source of renewable energy. Concentrating solar power, CSP, is an advanced solar technology that the US Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, is jointly testing with Alcoa to make the technology competitive in the United States by lowering its cost to generate energy. In 2010, NREL and Alcoa installed a new Alcoa-designed concentrating solar power parabolic trough collector at NRL's test facility in Golden, Colorado. One of the benefits of concentrating solar power technology is that thermal energy can be stored and drawn upon during short cloudy periods and at night. Therefore, the technology provides better grid stability and increased capacity factors compared to photovoltaic applications.
We consume much more than we did a decade ago, 2 decades ago. The amount of packaging, the amount of materials, the amount of waste has gone up. Landfills are getting filled. We are a disposable society in terms of many of the things that we buy and sell.
I'm standing on one of the many landfills that exist all over the United States, as well as other parts of the world. The reason I'm here is because I'm very much concerned about the incredible amount of waste we produce and what that means to the sustainability of our environment and human existence on this planet. Worldwide, the annual production of municipal solid waste was 2.02 billion tonnes in 2006, according to the latest Global Waste Management Marketing Assessment Report, and it's expected to rise to 2.8 billion tonnes in 2011. Landfills worldwide release an estimated 20 to 60 million tonnes of methane per year into the Earth's atmosphere, according to a report co-authored by the US Environmental Protection Agency. Although it is not the world's largest producer of solid waste, the US alone produces an average of 250 million tonnes of solid waste a year. In 2007, over 254 million tonnes of municipal solid waste was collected, and according to the EPA, 85 million tonnes of that waste was recycled or composted. Most of the rest ended up in landfills, like this. The amount of trash that the United States produces has tripled in the last 50 years. At that rate, we'll be producing nearly 1 billion tonnes of trash by the year 2060. Worldwide, landfills are running out of room for waste, and some areas are running out of space for landfills. If we don't recycle more, as well as reuse and reduce our use more often, we will soon be surrounded by our own waste. This will be the beginning of the end. When something's produced and it ends its life in a landfill, it's labeled a cradle-to-gate item. A newer, more enlightened way of thinking takes this concept to a whole new level called cradle-to-cradle. Cradle-to-cradle considers the entire life cycle of a product, what impacts are involved in its production and what, if any, benefits are derived from its use, and then, most importantly, can the product be reused after its original useful life is over, such as with an aluminum can, which is infinitely recyclable. This aluminum beverage can is no doubt the most widely used and recognized form of packaging, and we use an awful lot of them. The aluminum industry estimates that approximately 100 billion aluminum beverage cans are produced each year. We're going to use this can as an example of what each of us can do to reduce greenhouse gases and help create man's sustainable future. Slightly better than half of all the aluminum cans produced each year in the US are recycled. If aluminum cans were not being recycled, there'd be over 100 billion of them left in landfills and on land every year. That's an awful lot of trash. What happens to all those cans that are produced? Better yet, what should happen to them? The answer is very simple. They should be recycled. Aluminum never wears out. As was stated earlier, it's infinitely recyclable. An aluminum can can be recycled and returned to a store's shelf in about 9 weeks' time. In other words, you could buy the same can 6 times in 1 year if it's recycled. An aluminum beverage can is the ideal example of a cradle-to-cradle approach to manufacturing and recycling. 73% of all the aluminum produced since 1888 is still in use today. The amount could be greater, but millions of pounds of aluminum are wastefully discarded and destroyed every year. Discarded aluminum cans make up a significant portion of trash in landfills. Some landfills incinerate aluminum, which necessitates more bauxite mining. The amount of aluminum unnecessarily discarded instead of recycled is enough to rebuild the entire American commercial airline fleet every 3 months. Recycling aluminum cans is easy to do, and the energy saved by recycling them is quite mind-boggling. For instance, recycling allows the aluminum can industry to make up to 20 times more cans for the same amount of energy it takes to produce 1 can from virgin ore. Recycling just 1 aluminum can saves enough electricity to run your TV for 3 hours. Recycling 1 ton of aluminum saves the equivalent in energy of 2,350 gallons of gasoline, which is equal to the amount of electricity used by a typical home over a period of 10 years. And the energy saved each year through cans currently being recycled could light the city of Washington, D.C. for 3.7 years. In keeping with the example of the infinitely recyclable aluminum can, enlightened manufacturers are now thinking before they design or manufacture a product. How can it be done so that it can be more easily recycled? Consumer electronics are a good example. In our society, cell phones, laptops, and other computers have become disposable. Manufacturers are now beginning to think about how these items might be recycled when they're designing them, and what materials can be used to make them more easily recyclable.
We've seen a number of states and countries being aggressive investors in energy efficiency, which is everything from more efficient light bulbs to more efficient water heaters to having sensors to turn off appliances you're not using. So there's all of these things available. We haven't deployed that many of them on a global scale yet.
More people might become more active aluminum beverage can recyclers if they realize that it not only saves energy and is good for sustainability of our environment, but it can also put money in their pocket. It's amazing what recycling aluminum beverage cans can gain you. Look at what it did for one couple.
We'd been talking about having a wedding, how we were going to pay for it, the fact that an average wedding is about $20,000, and having just bought a house and just lost a job, we didn't really have that much money on hand. And so I was actually having a very sleepless night, and it just kind of slapped me upside the head, and I figured, hey, it might work.
She suggested we collect cans and actually, recycle them for the money, and I was like, okay, sounds like a reasonable idea. Let's figure out how many cans this actually is going to be so we get an idea of what our goal, is here.
Well, when we took our couple loads to recycling, we had about a ton of cans each time. Our complete project, we recycled the equivalent of 5 tons of cans, which is about 400,000.
Every can that comes by my hands goes into a recycling bin.
Recycling is one of those things that it's a great thing to do no matter what. It could be saving the environment, it could be saving natural resources, it could be making money, it could be it makes them feel good, it could be that it's fun. For us personally, it was the fact that we were able to offset not only all of the carbon emissions that we had from people traveling to the wedding and such, but we were also able to offset about 5 years worth of the carbon emissions that Peter and I as a couple and just living our everyday lives account for.
Like Pete and Andrea, many people collect and recycle aluminum cans for profit. It puts some money in their pockets while helping to keep our environment clean and giving those aluminum cans another life cycle. Since 1972, Americans have recycled 37 billion pounds or 1,099 trillion aluminum cans and earned over $25 billion for their recycling efforts. An aluminum beverage can has the potential for eternal life, giving it many life cycles ad infinitum. As long as it's recycled, it can come back again as good as new. Aluminum is truly the ideal material for a cradle-to-cradle, no-waste manufacturing and recycling process. Being infinitely recyclable and with an endless life cycle, aluminum cans are the ideal packaging material for all beverages. Just imagine what environmental problems could be solved if water was canned or put in an aluminum bottle instead of being put in a plastic bottle. Plastic bottles are recycled at half the rate of aluminum. And with plastic, recycling is a one-and-done experience. In 2006, Americans purchased 31 billion bottles of water. Since on average only 10% of plastic water bottles are recycled, 90% end up either as garbage or litter. An astounding 30-minute single-serve, non-returnable plastic bottles ending up in landfills or as litter. Manufacturing plastic bottles is very energy intensive. In New York State, the oil used each year to make the plastic bottles used by the state's inhabitants is equal to 66 million gallons of gasoline, enough to power 120,000 automobiles for a year. And the manufacturing process releases thousands of metric tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Getting rid of plastic water bottles that are not recycled has dire environmental consequences. Incinerating used bottles produces toxic byproducts such as chlorine gas and ash, containing heavy metals tied to a host of human and animal health problems, as well as increasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And buried water bottles can take up to 1,000 years to biodegrade.
So there's lots of interesting examples of large-scale human impact on the planet that haven't gotten a lot of attention. And one of them is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And what it turns out to be is an area just about the size of Texas, where a number of the currents from North America and from Asia come together in what's called a gyre. So there's a large rotating area, again, state of Texas size in the Pacific. And it turns out to be a place where a lot of the non-degradable or slowly degradable materials, like plastics, get pulled together. In fact, if you sieve through this area, kind of an ocean expedition, you find all these small, tiny, microscopic bubble-sized bits of plastic, but also then large, macroscopic ones you can see floating in the water. And that illustrates our ability not only to dramatically change the ecosystem, that's a lot of plastic, lots of animals feed in this area. In fact, a well-told story is that the sea turtles primarily eat jellyfish. And to a sea turtle, plastic floating in the water looks a lot like a jellyfish. And there's lots and lots of recorded turtle deaths because they've eaten plastic, they've gotten it wrapped around their heads, or they've gotten their gullets full of plastic which they can't digest. There's no ambiguity about the science, there's no question about the source, there is no natural source of plastic. This is all human-generated garbage that was dumped into the oceans and gets churned around in this area.
Discarded plastic bottles and plastic grocery bags are everywhere. In landfills, in the ocean, lying in empty lots, and they can be there for many years to come.
Many grocery stores around the world now are rewarding customers who bring in recyclable bags and bring their groceries home in those bags. We're also seeing some places now saying, well, we're going to simply tax those. We're not going to sell plastic bags after 2012 or 13, but from today on, we're going to make you pay a quarter or more to take those bags home. And all of those things make a lot of sense, and we need to do them across the board.
Recycling aluminum beverage cans is just one of many ways we can make a positive impact on mankind's sustainable future. It illustrates how important it is to consider the effect every action we take has on our environment and the long-term health of our planet Earth. Recycling one aluminum can reduces energy consumption, greenhouse gas and toxic emissions, saves natural resources, lessens landfill needs, and saves money. It's a small action, but a big step in the right direction.
The feature that I find most ironic is that we all buy health insurance. We, in fact, spend a lot of money on the military because we're worried about potential events that might take place. The damages and the probability of global warming are, in fact, much higher than many of the things, particularly in the world of health insurance, that we buy insurance for just as a matter of course. And yet we haven't got our sense of urgency to recognize that we need to also get planetary insurance, because we are changing that system in ways that are going to come back to bite us if we can't change this path.
The Global Climate Coalition's scientific advisors informed its leadership in 1995, 2 years before the carbon lobby led the fight against the Kyoto Protocol, that the science behind man-made global warming was well established and cannot be denied. Isn't it time we stopped arguing about whether or not the phenomenon of global warming is a fact we are now forced to live with and do something about it? How many floods, droughts, famines, wildfires, melting glaciers and rising temperatures will it take to make all of our world leaders wake up to the fact that global warming is a reality, and we need to work together to do something about it for the survival of mankind? The time to act is now.